Welcome to the final part in this series about Camelot Theme Park. You've seen the first two episodes, the 80s where it was the early years of the park, the 90s where the park peaked, and now we're going into the 2000s where things took a pretty steep nosedive. Let's get into it. Now we start in 2000 with the addition of a new attraction, and that is the Formula K go-karts. Now interestingly, I found that there was an issue when they applied to get these carts put in terms of noise. There was a lot of concerns from the locals, and I don't think this would have impacted them based on the opening hours of the park, but they were not allowed to run the carts after 8:30 in the evening until 9 AM the following morning. I also found a picture of the mayor opening this ride. She looks a little bit awkward, but you know, doing her thing for the local area. Now, I found this one a little bit strange, but the park removed an attraction in anticipation of a new attraction. So they took out the Tower of Terror. Didn't quite go to plan because in the process of removing it, I think it was some sparks led to a fire, so that damaged a few things. And interestingly, the attraction that they wanted to put in this place was a Vekoma in Vertigo ride, I think it's called. They didn't get permission, so they removed the old attraction and couldn't put something in its place. Kind of seems a little bonkers that they didn't get permission first. This isn't the kind of thing where you ask for forgiveness instead of permission, so yeah, that seems a weird way of doing things, and they ended up losing an attraction for nothing. Speaking of planning permission though, I did find another article where the park was granted permission for 75 holiday chalets. Now, these never happened, so they didn't get the permission to put in this new attraction, but they did get permission for holiday chalets, and then they chose not to do that. So I'm entirely sure that would have been interesting to see what would have happened had that came to fruition. Obviously there was an on-site hotel, but I am curious if those chalets would have made any difference to the future of the park. I did find one celebrity, well actually two celebrities kind of, that visited the park in 2000. The first one was Andy Crane, the children's TV presenter. He was on the park to represent for St George's Day. I think he was basically trying to promote England and St George, and he turned up and dressed as a knight, and there's a picture of him in Camelot. The second one, kind of celebrity-ish, is that the Time Team from Channel 4 were on site because they were basically doing a thing around about King Arthur and Camelot, so logically they visited the park and tried out some of the attractions. Now 2001 was quite a mixed bag for the park. There was some highs and definitely some lows. So they added in a new attraction in Excalibur 2. Now, as I think I said in the previous episode, Excalibur and Excalibur 2, apart from the name, they are nothing alike. This is a Fabry evolution. It is still another attraction that spins you all the way upside down, does full 360. So there's kind of that similarity with the previous one, but this let's say, visually very, very different. When it left the park, it moved on to Pleasureland Southport. Interestingly, this was the first attraction to get its own dedicated advert.
Excalibur 2.
Come on, you big scaredy cat!
Camelot. The family-sized day out.
Now this was also the year that the park introduced a new animatronic show with the Cats of the Round Table. Now I have hunted high and low across the internet and I cannot find anything about this in terms of any photographs, any footage at all. So in my head, this is what I think it looked like, and I guarantee it was nothing like this. The park's made some strange decisions, and for the opening day, they opened with Homer Simpson, Bart Simpson, and Bob the Builder. I'm not entirely sure I see how any of those are connected to medieval times, and certainly why Bob the Builder is there with Homer. Odd choice. Now they added another coaster this year with the Gauntlet. Now this was a Pinfari coaster. Now it suffered quite a lot of downtime. It had a couple of good seasons and then it had a couple of terrible seasons. They did a lot of work to refurbish the trains and the braking system. They brought in another train, but yeah, ultimately it didn't last, and it was removed in 2005 to make way for the Nightmare Ride, and it briefly operated at Pleasureland Southport and is now over in Bulgaria. The final attraction I can see from this year is the Jousting Knights Dodgems, which, as the name suggests, is basically a set of dodgems. Nothing particularly fancy, they don't seem to be that heavily themed, but you know, most parks nowadays seem to have a set of dodgems. they had one too. I did find another advert from this year, and that was promoting the hotel this time.
Make your visit to Camelot Theme Park even more magical. Stay at our hotel. Call 01257 455 000.
Now, this is where things take a pretty sad turn, because in 2001, a member of staff lost their life whilst trying to maintain that new gauntlet ride that we were talking about. Basically, he was greasing the track whilst it was in operation, got hit by the train and killed. Now, it was later discovered that there was no safety procedures at all on this ride, no written procedures, and the park was fined £40,000 and then a further £20,000 when it was found that there was no procedures. So it doesn't seem like a hefty fine, to be honest, but yeah, that was quite a sad day. Now, another permission planning thing that I found that again did not come to fruition. The park was given permission for a giant Ferris wheel. Now, it was around about 100 feet tall. Again, there's no sign of this. This never materialized. So that, along with the chalet, I'm kind of curious how many other plans that I've not found that did not come to fruition. What I find kind of interesting about this though is it seems that there was a lot of locals that were against this. And that may be what put paid to this. I mean, they got permission, but they did not build it. And I've said this in the Towers videos before. I do find it rather interesting. I mean, unless you've lived in that area before it was a theme park, I've never understood moving to live near a theme park and then complaining about the theme park. Like, as I say, makes sense if you lived there before it was a thing, but otherwise, the hell did you move there for in the first place? This is where the writing was starting to be kind of seen on the wall effectively for this park, because there was a set of reviews that came out and this park got 1 star out of 5 because apparently it had very little for teenagers and it just was not a quality park. I think that's probably a fair statement, and definitely things deteriorate over the coming years, but yeah, they managed to squeeze another 10 years out of the park, but yeah, clearly it was in a bad state for quite some time. Bit of a random one, but on that same newspaper cutting that mentions the park being in a sad state, just below that there's an article about a family who had purchased a PC and it kept randomly turning off and they had to send it back for support. Kind of bizarre that that sort of thing made the news back in the early 2000s, because really? And I kind of got a little bit excited because I found an article. I'm searching newspapers for Camelot and I found an article about a huge drugs bust, a massive drugs bust, and I thought, oh, something big has gone down in Camelot, you know, big raid, etc. Now it turns out that they did a huge raid nearby. They just started in the Camelot car park, so I thought I had a big story there, but turns out that was a bust too. There's a few attractions, certainly if you watch the first episode, there's a few attractions that is very difficult to get exact years when they operated, like when they opened. And one of those is the Bertie Bassett's driving school. Now, the first time I can see it mentioned on one of the maps is in 2002, so I'm going to assume it was around about then. Might not be exactly that year, but effectively this was a very simple little kids driving school thing, a little bit like the one that's in Towers right now beside Hex. You know, tiny little cars, definitely not adult friendly, so there was no parents going on this. Where they basically just drove around the track. I think I've seen like fire engines and stuff like that they're themed on that you drive around. So I think that was added roughly 2002. Now moving on to 2003, yet another coaster was added to the park, and this was another Maurer spinning coaster. I suppose comparable to Spinball Whizzer at Towers or Dragon Fury at Chessington. It lasted for, well, I think until the park closed, and then eventually when it closed it was moved to Skyline Park over in Germany, where I believe it is still operating to this day. It got another small kids ride, and that was a very small set of teacups. Now I've seen two names for this. I'm not sure if it was interchangeable or if it's another one of these that they just kept renaming the attraction, so I'm not sure which order these appeared in, but I've seen it called Cups and Sorcerers and I've seen it called Cups of the Round Table, but yeah, it was just a basic little kids teacups ride. The last one, so they added another attraction, and this was the Playland Express. There was a little train ride that went around the track. Again, as I've said earlier, that the park got slated for quality. If you take a look at the footage for this, it is absolutely dire. This thing is just a track on a massive concrete slab with absolutely no theming at all. And it was like this train that goes so slow, it must have been the most depressing thing for children to go on. So yeah, you can kind of see that the quality just was not there at all. Now 2004, not very much happened, to be honest, in terms of the park itself. There was no additions. I don't think there was any removals either. It was very, very quiet in the media. However, unfortunately, there was another sad incident, and that was yet another death. This time it was a 5-year-old boy in the car park who was struck by a coach. I believe it was a coach that was ferrying the staff back and forward, but yeah, unfortunately he passed away. Now 2005 saw ride removals, and you know, again, we're on the decline here. This is the park starting to disappear bit by bit. They removed Venom, that was their indoor coaster, and that was apparently due to increased safety standards for indoor attractions. Obviously, the amount of money to comply with the new standards was just too much, so they decided to kick it out instead. And then the Quintain that I mentioned previously, the one that kind of felt out of place in the park, it obviously didn't get much traction and people weren't that impressed with it, so that also disappeared in 2005. Now I find this a little interesting because in 2006 there is the park, so again, going with this poor theme and bad reviews, the park was joint bottom in a kind of list of attractions. There was like a secret mum thing, you know, like a secret shopper sort of thing, who was going around all these different attractions, and Camelot came out at the bottom. What I find really bizarre though is that in the leaflet for this year, the park actually said, contrary to rumours about our closure, the park is not going anywhere. So like, they even acknowledged the fact that everybody knew the park was in a bad state and that it was about to disappear. I mean, they did last another 5 or 6 years, but yeah, there was no turning back from this one, and we all know what eventually happened. Now on the flip side of that though, in 2007 the park did have that final attempt at getting things going, and I think that's probably where that leaflet last year saying, you know, we're not going anywhere, was they knew this attraction was coming, and it was obviously their final stab at bringing things back for the park. And that was the Nightmare. Now, again, if you've watched the first episode, the very first coaster they put in was called the Nightmare. It didn't last under that name, but this was the much bigger coaster that was rather kind of menacing. It was purchased from Japan, flown over. I think it cost them $3 million to get the coaster, bring it over and construct it. And it was quite an impressive coaster in terms of the forces that it pulled. It was up to 5G, which is, you know, more force than you get on your average coaster these days. So I'm kind of a little bit disappointed I did not get to experience this one. But yeah, I found a promotional image where one of the staffs, I'm assuming he's trying to look menacing, doesn't really work. But yeah, that was basically how they launched this one. Unfortunately, when the park closed, this did not get transferred to any other site. There were some rumours that there were parks interested in purchasing it, but they just could not come to an agreement on the price, and effectively it was left to rot. And well, you'll find out later on what happened to it, but yeah, but unfortunately no longer a ride you can visit. I did find a sort of photo of the entry board, which had like list of the shows and the prices and stuff. Now, it was £18 to get in, which on the face of it you think that's a reasonable price. I did do the inflation calculator though, and that works out at 30 quid nowadays, which is sort of comparable to Blackpool. And given that, you know, from what I'm hearing here, the quality wasn't there, I'd argue it definitely didn't justify 30 quid. So you can kind of see why they struggled to get people through the door. Now moving on to 2009, and this is when the park went into receivership and said, we're not opening this year at all, you know, it's game over kind of thing. They sold the hotel to Lavender Hotels, so that kind of did its thing. And then they did find a buyer. It was the Story Group, which is a construction company. They purchased it. They actually still own the land to this day. And they did open the park in 2009. It was a little bit later than planned, but it did open for the 2009 season. Interestingly, the rack suffered a rather severe mechanical failure, and that closed permanently. That did not come back. And I did also find an interesting episode of Tarrant Lets the Kids Loose, where there's a little kid whose dad worked at the park on one of the stalls, and basically his son comes in to help. And well, I'll let you watch this footage.
Start with anything then. I will let you have one. Don't tell my dad. I will give you a shock. Don't tell anyone. Loads of people have got sharks. I don't know how many.
I wonder if him giving away all those sharks is what was the final straw that broke the camel's back, in the demise of the park. The last thing from 2009, I did find another advert from the park.
Legend has it there is a land where knights battle for honor, where dragons fly through the air, where you can experience your wildest dreams or your darkest nightmares. It's time to live the legend this weekend at Camelot.
Right, moving on to 2011, we've got some more sad news. Again, this time there was another incident, this time with a young boy on Excalibur 2 who fell from the ride. I don't know exactly what injuries, all I know is that they were severe injuries, so yeah, the park's safety standards and maintenance clearly just were not there in the latter years, and it was clear it was becoming a bit of a death trap.
Where can you see knights charging along in action-packed jousting tournaments? Then charge along at breathtaking speed on spectacular rides. Experience the wonderful wizardry of Merlin. Enjoy all the fun of the farm. And round the day off with an enchanting stay at a magical hotel. Camelot, the land of great nights and amazing days.
So that brings us to 2012 when the park shut its doors for the final time. I think it's interesting because although the writing had clearly been on the wall for some time, there's definitely a lot of people when you read some of the forums who were surprised and shocked to hear the news that it had in fact closed. I'll be honest, I don't think I would have been based on everything else that I've seen. But yeah, 2012, the park closed its doors, never to reopen. Now there's been a few things have happened on that site since then. Now in 2014 and 2016 there was separate proposals for housing on that site, none of which got approved, so that still has not happened. I think there may be something happening again in terms of trying to do something with that, but yeah, 2 failed attempts at bringing some housing to that area. 2017, I found that one of the trains from the Nightmare coaster literally fell off the back of a lorry near Blackpool, and I think there was rumours that that train and possibly the track was going to, so I think I said somebody was trying to purchase it. I think it was Pleasureland, Southport, one of them was trying to purchase it. They denied it. However, the train was seen heading in their direction, and as I say, it fell off the back of a lorry and, well, caused a bit of traffic jam for a little while. And then you move on to 2020, and that is when the Nightmare is finally demolished. Now, again, that's fairly sad to see. I mean, at that point it had been left to rot for 8 years, so there was probably no turning back. You know, it would have needed a significant amount of investment to get that back to operational if another park took it. So effectively it was destroyed and scrapped. And then 2022, the park started to be used as a Halloween scare event. Now the first one was Camelot Rises. And from what I can tell, the original one probably related to COVID and not being able to kind of interact and stuff. Like, I know we were kind of getting out of it almost completely by that point. I think this first incarnation was an in-car experience, so you drove around bits of it.
For an alpha virus contamination. Do not leave the vehicle at any time. It's dangerous.
It's then, I mean, it still is now used for a scare event. Scare City is the current one, although almost all of the buildings now have been completely demolished. There is very, very little left because it was just becoming like a safety nightmare, and there was constantly people breaking in, urban explorers trying to get in and stuff. So from what I've seen in articles, the Story Group, who still own that land, were spending so much money on security to try and keep people out that they were just like, let's just scrap it because it's, you know, it's a death trap, let's get rid of it. So right now, in fact, just up until last week, or possibly even this week, it has been used for a scare event because at the time of filming it has just been Halloween, but the park, or that area, is largely unused now. It will be interesting to see what happens. Anyway, if you have any memories from these latter years, I would love to hear them in the comments down below, so please do let me know. If you've enjoyed this one and indeed the rest of the series, please make sure you hit that like button and do consider subscribing. I will do this for other parks going forward. I've been Chris, you've been watching Coaster Dad, and I shall see you in the next one. Adios!